Grace to you and peace from God our Father and the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, as we have gathered in the midst of his presence here this morning. So what is Easter? What does Easter really mean to you? Is it that day when a bunny rolled the stone away from the tomb? Or interestingly, some of you ate pork to honor this Jewish guy. Personally, I'm saying Easter is a day to pray that Missouri will get a professional baseball team. That's okay. Yeah. Just in case you haven't been following either the Royals or the Cardinals, it isn't going well as of yet. So you might want to be praying for a resurrection of that sort. Why are you here listening to a sermon? Why are you here in the context of worship? There are a lot of other things you could be doing. Why are you here? What does that mean for you? Why is this somehow important to you? I encourage you to read all the four Gospels. They are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Those are the four books in the Bible that speak to the life of Jesus in particular. Now, the first three, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are referred to as the synoptic Gospels. That's because they're very similar to one another. And they were familiar with the writings of each other when they did their own. And so their Easter story, it has some unique aspects to it as well, as you might surmise. You know, when there's an accident or something and there are witnesses, and the police come and they interview the witnesses, and it sounds like they saw 4 different accidents, right? Because this one's, well, this is what happened. No, this is what happened. Well, that's kind of like it was too. Now, years go by before it gets written down on paper, and so there are differences of awareness of exactly how the events transpired. But they're pretty much the same, and they do what I call the gender war. Now, again, these are men who are writing these gospel books, so I think at least there's some lovely transparency that they are humble enough to admit that they kind of messed up. And they poke fun at themselves because the women are the first ones to hear that Jesus rose from the dead. An angel tells them this. They go back and they tell the guys. And the men, to a man, goes, nah, old wives' tales. What do women know? It is not a pleasant moment. And so the guys have to figure it out for themselves, and of course, eventually they do. Well, John is a gospel unto his own, where Matthew, Mark, and Luke are more a Middle East Jewish type of philosophical approach. John brings now this new emerging Western approach, and again, much more philosophical in what we think of philosophy. And in that, he goes, I'm not really interested in this whole gender war thing. He focuses in on what he feels is primary to get the story across. And so he has just one woman, that being Mary Magdalene. Now, you might know about Mary Magdalene. She's a key person. Jesus Christ Superstar is on television tonight, right? And I think, it's been a long time, but I believe that Mary Magdalene is portrayed as a prostitute. That's not necessarily clear in the Bible, but people have just generally assumed that was true, that was the life she came out of before getting connected with Jesus. But she is a real central figure, particularly at the announcement of the resurrection of Jesus. So, you have Mary going to the tomb. It was the day after the Sabbath, so it was Sunday. They couldn't go to the tomb on Sabbath because they were supposed to be resting, what have you. But there was this practice, the rituals, that needed to take place with ointments and things for the preparation of the body. And so she went to do that and finds that the tomb, the stone was rolled away and there was no one in the tomb. Now this is distressing. And what would you think if you were to find such? She assumes what any normal human person would think. And she says, someone stole Jesus' body. She's upset. She runs to tell the guys. And so, of course, Judas, who betrayed Jesus, now is dead. And so there are 11 disciples left. 9 of them evidently are so scared of whatever the Jews might be doing, because if indeed the Jewish authorities had removed Jesus' body for some reason, evidently crucifying him wasn't enough, and so who knew what might be done to them. So they were just saying, nope, just going to hang around and stay here in the house. But Peter and John run off. And again, I so love reading the Bible. You need to read the Bible kind of almost without a religious expression and find there what is to be discovered, because the Bible is sometimes very humorous. It is so human. It leaves out no details. Sometimes I really do kind of wonder, why'd you put that in? You really didn't have to, but they do. And so you have this thing that goes back and forth between Peter and John. Peter gets to be the one who Jesus says is going to be the foundation of the church. So John is always kind of saying, hey, I'm important too. And he was, it was always sort of, when there was a special group, it was Peter, James, and John. And those three were always bantering back and forth about getting some kingdom power amongst them. So that seems to be what happens here. So John wants you to know that he can run faster than Peter. There's one of those things about there's absolutely no reason to say, okay, we're running to the tomb, but I get there first. Okay. No good reason other than to say, I can run faster than Peter. So, yeah. But Peter is Peter. So John gets there first, but he goes, this is scary. Who knows what I'm going to discover if I go into that tomb? So he's just like peering in or something. Not Peter. For better and worse, he's always the one to just run right in. And so he does. He zooms into the tomb, finds just the linens and nothing else. Okay. So what are you going to do? They go home. They could have stuck around and said, hey, people nearby, do you know anything about where they took Jesus' body? Of course, that would be a little risky if there were some nefarious things going on here. No, evidently, The Price is Right was on television, and so they just went home. Think about that. From their perspective, someone had stolen Jesus' body, and they just go home. But not Mary. And I think there are pieces of this in a subplot sort of a way that John really wants you to notice in understanding how we are called, how God interacts with us, how God chooses to reward us. Time and time again throughout Scripture, it shows that persistence pays off. And that's really difficult for humans. We are not a patient breed. Because when you read the Bible, you need to ask, why didn't, or why this? Why didn't Jesus show up at the tomb initially when Mary shows up? He easily could have. He could say, hi, Mary, remember I said we were going to have me rise from the dead? Here I am. Isn't it great? And Mary goes, yes. Didn't do that. She's upset, and she runs to tell the guys. Jesus could have shown up when the two male disciples appear. Could have said, hey, you guys sort of messed up during the whole crucifixion period and the trial and whatever. You were denying me and things like that. But, hey, I told you I was going to rise again, and I'm back, and so all's good, all right? No. Still nothing in the tomb other than the linens. The guys go home, confused and likely scared. But Mary stays. She doesn't have any good reason to, but she instinctually sticks around, at least in the place where she last knew Jesus resided. And she weeps. That's what you're supposed to notice. Because it is at that moment, when everybody else goes away, and in a sense, Mary shows her dedication, her willingness to stick by Jesus, whatever's happening. And the angels say, hey, Well, Jesus rose from the dead. He said he was going to, but okay. And here too, it's absolutely fascinating. Jesus does not seem to appear physically after the resurrection like he did before. Because not only at this moment, but also in some of the upcoming appearances of Jesus as well, he has to prove who he is. So Mary turns to this evidently normal-looking guy, assumes he is the gardener. Says, do you know anything about Jesus? You didn't happen to take his body, did you? If so, just let me know where it is. Just tell me, okay? She doesn't recognize him by his appearance. And he answers back, and she doesn't recognize him yet. And then the kicker is, he says her name. Mary. And she goes, Rabbi. That's another piece you're absolutely supposed to notice, that you understand, you recognize who God is when he calls your name. Now, from time to time, of course, Jesus, particularly in that culture, referred to us as sheep, and he says, my sheep know my voice, and they follow me. So that's the deal. He wanted us to understand that when we hear his voice calling out to us, we follow, and that is a most unique and delightful moment. Our names are important to us, right? When they're used in a negative way, that really hurts. When we hear our name utilized in a positive way, that's great. And when we hear somehow, maybe in that still small voice that the Bible talks about, somehow the voice of God call our name, well, it doesn't get any better than that. The society of Jesus' time was examining the issue of resurrection, as I mentioned. That it's interesting, the Jewish culture never really got into a concept of life after death. It just wasn't anything that was brought up to them. And Jewish folks, even today, are really into the here and now and not worried about, oftentimes, what's beyond. But whatever it was, in this unique moment in time when they were looking for the Messiah to come, everybody was, and there were others who claimed they were the Messiah and turned out to be imposters. They were having this conversation then, is this all there is? Life on this earth moves so quickly, relatively speaking. Just even from kind of a personal, almost selfish standpoint, I don't want this to be all that there is. Because, I've tried my best, and maybe as I go through life, there are some regrets, some dreams that didn't work out. Is this all there is? And so Jesus comes on the scene at a primary point, and that's why I hope for us, because we can, all these centuries later, really take eternity for granted. And we have this kind of sense that, God loves everybody, and God just lets everybody go to heaven, and so that's really great. Nobody wants to go to hell. Fine, end of story. Well, there seems to be a little bit more to it than that. When Jesus says, come, you have a cross to bear as well. Take it up, follow me. Whoever is going to be first needs to be last. You need to be servants of all. All of this kind of teaching from Jesus into understanding what it is to follow him, doesn't that mean something? And so for us, really to take a fresh look. We are at a point where people aren't crazy about following Jesus or being particularly devoted. We make a distinction, interestingly, between spirituality that is sometimes just kind of, I believe in God, to religion where we buy into a certain, if you will, dogma. Yep, I'm a follower of Jesus. I live this Christian way. And particularly, we're often not very interested in church and worship and those kinds of things. So you have to give people reasons today. Why should I? And the number one reason from my perspective is eternity, not just because I don't go to hell when I die, but because life is transformed in incredible ways not just for what is to come, but in my own opportunity of life at this point. For all of those struggles that I now experience, I can move through them confident because I have all the power of the universe alongside of me. That's what changes things. So, you have Jesus, and he's already shown, kind of foreshadowing, the power over death. Because that is, we would agree today, our biggest threat is death. It's the end of where we can see. And so when Jesus raises his buddy Lazarus, who had already died, brings him back to life, well, that's pretty cool. And people notice. And indeed, in this last week that we call Holy Week, when Jesus comes into Jerusalem, that's what's got people all in a tither. That's why they think that Jesus is the Messiah, because if you can raise somebody from the dead, you can certainly kick out those nasty Romans who are governing over us. But Jesus says, no, my kingdom is not of this world, it's a spiritual kingdom. And people go, what? And they execute him. But here's where the rubber hits the road. Not only does Jesus rise from the dead, but he ascends into heaven. He shows that there is something beyond, and he says that's for you too. In this vital moment, when a culture is asking that question, is there anything after our earthly experience? Jesus comes and he says the answer is yes. And it gives you the power, the confidence to live life obediently and faithfully now. It changes everything. As difficult as it is to place ourselves in the spirit world, it seems that Satan is blindsided. That as much as he knows about the kinds of things that are happening that are beyond us, he doesn't seem to understand what God is up to, because it appears that when Jesus is executed, Satan goes, yeah, I won. And from his perspective, in a sense, he did. Because he said, I run this earth. I am the power of earth. And there you go. Jesus, the Son of God, is dead. And Jesus goes, well, not so fast. Because I'm going to show you the power over death for everyone. My victory is everyone's victory. My eternity is everyone's eternity. And Satan is tricked. And that's the deal that changes everything for us in our own understanding of things. So the question is, how does Jesus' resurrection impact your life? What changes for you in that Jesus says there are infinitely more things for you to discover than is apparent to your earthly sight? Does that impact how you live life in any way that changes it? So, you have the opportunity. You can go home this afternoon, watch some golf, and eat a chocolate bunny. It's always interesting what the people in back do just to mess with my head. So we have at least one person that's going to be eating that bunny. And that's fine. But there is this invitation to linger at your figurative tomb. Whatever that tomb looks like for you, you know. Maybe you have a health scare. Maybe someone important to you has died. Maybe you've lost a job. Maybe someone picks on you at school. Maybe you don't think you're as attractive as some others. Maybe you don't make as much money as those baseball players who don't seem to be able to win a game, but okay, that's another matter. Whatever it is, that's a part of that kind of earthly peace that the devil comes and zings at us and says, in some ways, you're a failure. You should just be despondent. You should be depressed. You should just give up. It's just death, one way or another. A lot of us live there. It's a horrible place to be. And that is what drives me, and that's what so concerns me in our simplistic and shallow understanding of what eternity is all about. So if you want to know, well, today you can look at Mary Magdalene. Because Jesus rewards her because she sticks around. We stay at whatever our figurative tomb is, as risky as that might be. I mean, who knew who might be coming? You know, maybe the Jewish authorities were going to come back, see who was lingering around, and haul her off and kill her too. Could have happened. She knew no better than that. For her, that would have been a likely possibility. So it is that call in what Jesus says to bring up our own cross. Wherever that struggle is for you, to stick there and be confident of God's presence and that God will show up and of all things will call you by name. So in the week ahead, linger with your tomb, whatever that is, and stick there until you're confident that God's going to show up. You know, when back in the Old Testament, Jacob wrestled with God, and God goes, "Let me go," which is interesting. And Jacob says, "No, I won't until you bless me." And God goes, "Fine, I bless you. Now let me go." You go, okay. Well, it's the same thing. Stick around until you hear God call your name somehow. Because that's what our world desperately needs. That's the number one reason to follow Jesus. Because that eternity is a victory over all that earthly wise would get in our way. You can handle whatever's going to come this week when you're confident of the eternal path that God has for you.